All right, let's almost finish out a series that I started during the summer. So the season by season news and notes. We're up to the 2016-2017 season. I dropped this one a couple weeks ago because there was just so much going on. Well, now things seem to kind of slowed down again. So I thought, all right, make up the board and I'll do the 2016-2017 season, which leaves the 2018 and the 2019 seasons as the only two left. And we'll get those done in between now and the start of the regular season for 2019-2020. This is, of course, going by notes and stuff from that year. The top 10 that season, the top 10 players in the league, according to the Hockey News Annual. Number 1, Connor McDavid. Number 2, Sidney Crosby. The debate that still rages on now. There's a lot of Penguins fans right now typing Crosby's the best. Erik Karlsson, number 3. Patrick Kane, number 4. Carey Price, number 5. Sergei Bobrovsky, number 6. Evgeny Malkin, number 7. Austin Matthews, number 8. Victor Hedman, number 9. And Brent Burns, number 10. So that was your top 10. And again, that debate of McDavid and Crosby, I think will probably rage on throughout this season. Every time Crosby has a great game, every time McDavid has a great game, we can renew that debate all over again. The Anaheim Ducks, they had a pretty good season, and then they had a pretty good postseason. Not one that fans in Western Canada were happy about. They end up losing in round 3 to the Predators, but before that, they'd knocked out Calgary and Edmonton. So, good team, can't quite get over the hump, can't quite make it to the Stanley Cup Finals, and again, they have problems with the Nashville Predators in the playoffs. And losing at home in Game 7s, that's an issue for the Anaheim Ducks, of course. The Boston Bruins, they fired Claude Julien about halfway through that season, or a little over halfway through that season, and hired Cassidy. Cassidy leads them to an 18-8-1 finish to the season. Quick exit out of the playoffs, but the feeling was the Bruins were on their way up. And Claude Julien, towards the end, it was not working. The team wasn't responding to him. And, great thanks to him for, leading the Bruins to a Stanley Cup in 2011, but it was time to move on. Calgary, they get to the first round and they get swept in round 1. So it's interesting in that we see them in the playoffs, out of the playoffs, in the playoffs, out of the playoffs. This was a case where they'd been out, they were back in, and then they get swept in round 1. So you get caught up in the, are they really good during the regular season and not good in the playoffs? Is this a pattern? And it's a question we don't have an answer to even now. Coming out of the 2019 playoffs, we still don't have an answer to that question. The Chicago Blackhawks, 109 points. I favored them to go quite far in the playoffs, and they got eliminated in the first round. That was something. I had Washington and Chicago in the finals that year. I said Washington was going to win the cup. I was off by a year. The Chicago Blackhawks, that 109 points, looked great. And then in the first round, they got destroyed. So it's a crossroads for the Chicago Blackhawks franchise. And, of course, we know now where that ends up leading them. The Colorado Avalanche, boy, you want to talk about a miserable season. 48 points. Nathan MacKinnon, 82 games played. 53 points. A lot of people talk about McKinnon's contract and what a steal it is now. And I agree, but 53 points in 82 games, he didn't reach that potential until a couple years ago. And then it just clicked. It just clicked with him. Landeskog, 72 games played, 33 points. Rantanen was in as a rookie that year and had 38. So there was no indication that those three would form this super line and everything was going to be great. There was no indication of that at all. McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog, all three of them at that point. I mean, Rantanen we knew was going to be pretty good, but Landeskog and McKinnon, hot and cold. And what a difference a couple of years can make. And that's why when people talk about McKinnon's contract, I always kind of think, yeah, but he wasn't the dominant forward he would become later. Anyways, the Columbus Blue Jackets, 108 points under John Tortorella, but again out in the first round. So a lot of optimism that things are on their way up and that the Columbus Blue Jackets are relevant when it comes to talking about who might be long shot contenders, but still contenders for a Stanley Cup at some point. Columbus is in that conversation with that 108-point season. Dallas is out of the playoffs. I don't even have them on the board. Detroit, first playoff miss since 1990. And this is where Detroit finally says, all right, it's time to tear this apart. But you can tell that for Ken Holland, it was tough. He was very proud of the amount of seasons in a row that this team had made the playoffs. And he did sign some contracts that look bad now. He definitely seemed to have some sense of loyalty towards players that a lot of general managers don't. So at a time we're talking about loyalty in sports and how where's it gone? Where's the loyalty gone? Yeah. Holland's loyalty to some of these players is part of the reason why he's a GM now in Edmonton, and he ended up out of Detroit. If he had jettisoned some of these players, who knows? Maybe Detroit wouldn't have run into any kind of cap problems. Maybe they would have been able to rebuild sooner, and Ken Holland would have been seen as a genius. So that's just one of those things. The Oilers, 103 points for the Oilers that year, and they made it to the second round. And they were darn close against the Anaheim Ducks. It was one of those unusual positions where in a playoff series, I'm cheering for the Oilers. McDavid gets 100 points. In the playoffs, he had 9 points in 13 games. And everything coming out of that season pointed to the Oilers being a legit Stanley Cup contender. We're not talking about just making the playoffs. We were talking about a lot of different predictions saying Oilers in the finals. And that was at the point where Toronto and Edmonton fans are debating about which one's going to win it first. Not whether one team or the other will win it, just, well, which team's going to win it first and break that drought for Canada. And it wasn't laughed and scoffed at that point. The Oilers were seen as, look, they have McDavid, who's this huge megastar. Milan Lucic that first year was pretty darn good. And Cam Talbot looked really good in the nets. Clefbaum was fantastic on the blue line. Everything for Edmonton was great. And we know that it fell apart after that. But it is amazing to see how quickly that fell apart. Minnesota, these guys, 106 points. That's a team record. They had 49 wins, also a team record. And then they went out in the first round. So it didn't matter. And this is where Minnesota frustration really starts to boil over. The fans, tired of being out, and tired of losing to other teams in the playoffs immediately once they get started, they want something to change for them, and those first round exits don't work anymore. That's enough of that crap. And it's basically a look. If we're not going to be contenders, maybe we should consider just changing things up. And that was a sentiment from Minnesota fans coming out of that season, and there's still some of that there. Nashville, they are finalists. Pekka Rinne had a .930 save percentage in the playoffs. And when you look at that run, you can say he had a great run, and then you look at the games in Pittsburgh in that Stanley Cup final, and you ask yourself, now, did Nashville play terribly? Or does Rinne have like a mental block of playing in Pittsburgh? And would it have mattered if they'd put Saros in net to start those games? It's the same question that was asked about the Canucks after the 2011 finals against Boston. If Corey Schneider plays the games in Boston rather than Luongo, would the Canucks have been Stanley Cup champions? And it's a question we simply can't have the answer to. There's no way of knowing. Subban ended up having 22 games in those playoffs with 2 goals and 10 assists for 12 points. And we can talk now about Subban going to New Jersey and the Shea Weber deal. But it looked pretty good for Nashville, those playoffs. Subban was pretty good and helped people forget about Weber for at least those playoffs. Rinne melting down in Pittsburgh, that's kind of the thing that gets remembered. It is hard not to remember that because they were just epic meltdowns. And again, it really reminded me of the Luongo situations against Chicago in 2009, in 2010, and then against Boston in 2011. And that's where that debate comes in. Did the goalie melt down? Did the defense in front of him melt down? What kind of shots was he facing? All those debates we can have till the end of time. The New York Rangers, 102 points. So solid season, and they were out in round 2 against the Ottawa Senators. So half decent run. Again, it feels like the Rangers are close. Are they going to win something? What's going to happen? And now we look 2 years later, and they went through the retool. So there was no indication in 2017 that was necessary yet, but Jeff Gorton knew that things were going to have to change. Ottawa, 98 points for them that season, but they almost reached the finals. And you almost feel like, looking back now, that might have been the worst thing that happened to the Senators, that maybe it gave them this feeling that they were better than they were. Maybe it gave them this sense that we're a contender, we're going to get there. And that Eugene Melnyk really had a hard time with the fact they struggled the year after because they'd been so close the year before. So he seemed to take it really almost personal that the team fell apart after that. Karlsson, 19 games played, 2 goals, 16 assists, 18 points on one leg. This is where Erik Karlsson, for me, became my favorite Senator of all time, and it's not close. Whether it's his ability to play through pain, which can be a tough thing too, because you can make a nagging injury worse, or just the way he barks out orders on the ice, or the way he complains very, very loudly around microphones about refereeing, about teammates, about opposition. Yeah, he's not shy on the ice, and if you've ever heard sound bites of Karlsson on the ice, they're fantastic, really, honestly. So Ottawa went on a great run, and it was this amazing thing, and then it's quickly forgotten after. Pittsburgh, back-to-back championships for the Penguins. Yay. Crosby wins the Rocket Richard Award with 44 goals, which is weird because goal scoring's on its way back up, but individual goal scoring, not as much. So 44 goals wins the Rocket Richard for Sid the Kid, and everything is well in Pittsburgh. Crosby has become, at this stage, such a huge star in the postseason that now he gets name dropped with all of the greats in the game, and it really is honestly the right way to go. He definitely stacks up pretty darn well against some of the all-time greats in the game. Now, San Jose, round 1 loss to the Oilers. It's a setback, and here's the thing: the Oilers are seen as young and up and coming, and this team's going to be great. And the Sharks are seen as old and broken and kind of on their way down. And that's how quickly things change. And Marleau leaves. Marleau signs a contract, of course, with the Toronto Maple Leafs to provide them with some veteran leadership as that team decides they're good to go. But for San Jose, they're kind of seen as being on the brink of falling apart. And this is only a year after they'd gone to the Stanley Cup Finals. So again, going to the finals, it can be a really quick drop after that. Tampa, they were Cup favorites that year. Cup favorites in every conceivable way, and they missed the playoffs. 94 points. Stamkos, of course, struggles with injuries, and so Tampa's kind of dead in the water. The one thing that stood out for me, and I talked about it a lot in videos that year, was that Braden Point I thought was kind of sort of fantastic. He was thrown into the fire where it was a lot of centers getting hurt, and he was playing a much more prominent role than he was probably necessarily ready for, but he defied all expectations and was pretty fantastic. So they may have had a lost season and missed the playoffs, but it was an important lesson for Braden Point, and I think he came out the other side as a better player. Toronto goes from 69 points to 95. They lose in 6 games against the Washington Capitals. I'm going to say this right now. People talk about the Leafs losing in the first round 3 times. Fine. The problem with that is they haven't had home ice once. So, yes, they've lost in the first round 3 years in a row, and it starts with this loss to the Capitals. They haven't been a favorite in any series that they've been in. They need to get to a situation where they have home ice. They need to get to a situation where they're a favorite. And then we can make that grade of whether or not there's a failure going on with the Toronto Maple Leafs. It was a 26-point turnaround. It was unexpected. They were expected to be a good team, but not that good. And Matthews right out of the gate, bunch of goals right out of the gate, and the expectations went through the roof. He ended up with 40 goals as a rookie, only 4 away from a Rocket Richard trophy. And so the expectations, again, just continue to rise as the season goes along. And those expectations are still very, very high in Toronto, of course. Capitals, 118 points. They're number 1 overall, back-to-back seasons, and they're out in the second round. This is not a matter of me reading an old book and the wrong book. This is just the same book. This is how Washington has conducted themselves throughout their history, and they don't break that chain of unfortunate events until the following year. So this is the last really frustrating year. And this is when we get into that conversation, has the Capitals window closed? That conversation was had all over the place for the year after, and then all of a sudden, no, the window's still open, they won a cup. It's why I don't talk on this channel very much about windows being closed and all that, because I think I've seen too many times where a team's window is closed, starting with the Oilers in 1990. There was the Habs in 1993. Those are two examples just off the top of my head of teams that their windows closed. The Detroit Red Wings, before they finally broke through and won, there was talk about whether or not their window was closing. They're getting too old. They can't do it again. Their window's closed, and then they'd win it again. So I don't get into that discussion because I've seen too many teams prove that theory wrong. There's this window of opportunity when it really is just whoever plays that the best that spring. You look at St. Louis Blues as a good example this year, right? Rookies that year, so Austin Matthews, leading rookie scorer, 40 goals, 29 assists for 69 points. Patrick Laine, 36 goals, 28 assists, 64 points. Willie Nylander, 22 goals, 39 assists. Mitch Marner, 19 goals, 42 assists. Sebastian Aho, 24 goals, 25 assists for the Carolina Hurricanes. Leading scoring defenseman, Brent Burns, 82 games played, 29 goals, 47 assists. 76 points. Victor Hedman, 16 goals, 56 assists for 72 points. And Erik Karlsson, 17 goals, 54 assists, 71 points. Save percentage leaders, Sergei Bobrovsky, 931. Jimmy Howard, 927. Craig Anderson, 926. Braden Holtby, 925. And John Gibson and Scott Darling both had a 924 save percentage. It was that summer that Darling makes his exit from Chicago and goes to Carolina, with the starting job being his, with the money they're paying him, and of course we know how that turns out. But Darling looked pretty darn good as a backup for the Chicago Blackhawks. That's why when a guy goes from being a backup to being a starter, we never really know what we're going to get. It is a whole other ballgame when you are now the guy. You're the one being counted on. And for some goalies, they do great, and for some, not as great. And it can be impossible to project who's going to work and who isn't. There you go. 2016-2017 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.